Hello, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome back. Should I better come around the corner? The camera could see my profile, but no one else could see me. Hey, folks at home, you get to see the back of my head again. I watched a little video the other day, and you can just see my hand. Welcome back. Happy New Year, everybody. This has been such a conversation starter of a book that we've slowed down a little now that we're getting into kind of the meat of it and the heart of it. And that's okay. I really valued the conversations from this book and the stories and the experiences people have shared. And as I said, this book has helped me understand the book of Job in a different way, and that is a hard book to wrestle with. Where we left off last time, we started chapter is the 6th. It's called The Darkness of God. We only got a few pages in, but he was basically starting to talk about how the two extremes, which was like the creationists on one side and the atheists on the other. Not all atheists are like this. Not all people who believe in 6 days of creation are like this, but the really vocal, aggressive, us or them kind of sides of this. Both of them kind of have come to this whole topic of science and religion with an attitude of it has to be one or the other. It has to be either or. And the point we made that we got through last time was that God is not in addition to science. God is not in addition to anything. That God is part of it all. So that he's saying that this whole either or thing really is false from his perspective as a scientist and a Christian. Because it's not either or. It's not like you're adding God into the mix and it's like you're keeping God out of the mix. That it's all integrated together. But the attitude on both extremes is that science is so incompatible with religion that God can't have any place in science and science can't have any place in religion. Just what's the big, people have said he likes to use big words. The big $5 word here would be antithetical, right? It's just complete at odds with the other. Cannot go together.
See, I always thought that God created science.
Sure.
If he was there in the beginning with nothing, I'm sorry.
A good analogy of that is oil. It's been here under our ground forever, but nobody knew anything about it until we were ready for it. And so before that, if you'd have found it, it wasn't done any good. In fact, it'd been a nuisance. So it wasn't really found or even many of those items have been there since time began. It wasn't brought to our attention until we were ready to use this. And so
For like anything, then they give nuclear power to
exactly.
Cro-Magnon, man, or he's like,
Sure.
yeah,
Any new insight can be used for good or not, or sometimes it starts out good, it turns out not, or a little of both.
Well, that's where the free will comes into.
Right.
He allows mankind, said they're ready for it, whether the individual in that mankind is ready for it's another story.
Let's go back to the Garden of Eden. That's another thing we've talked about is what does it mean to say that we're created in the image of God? Does that mean something physical appearance? And Jeffrey has something on that.
I was thinking about that on the way in this morning.
Yeah. Well, we'll come back to what you shared with me in a little bit.
Yeah.
But I tend to think that it is more about what we've come to understand in 2,000 years of Christianity, that if God is Trinitarian, that's the best we can put words to it. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, co-eternal, 3 in 1, 1 in 3. That's relationship. That's, when you look at creation, there's order out of chaos. There's declaring things good. There's giving humanity responsibilities and duties to be custodians, that type of dominion, to oversee, not to overlord. And Genesis 2, that sort of hands-on creation image of God getting in the dirt, making Adam the dirt man, and Eve from the rib, and naming the animals, and so there's this intimacy as well as this kind of cosmic ordering of things. So if we're created in the image of God who creates, right? So then the first scenes in the Garden of Eden, the people are just walking around. They're noticing things. They see the tree. They're talking to the snake. That turned out bad. But they're having these conversations. They're noticing things. They're curious. They're asking questions. God also walks through the garden. I always love that image. And they hide, right? They find some leaves and turn it into clothes. Already in Genesis chapter 2, we have human beings creating stuff. It might already be tainted by sin. They didn't need to cover themselves, but they're already building, inventing, creating, exploring, asking questions. So maybe if God didn't create science, God created people who have curiosity and who have a sense of exploration and discovery and who are driven to, you know, affect the world around them and make stuff from it. And just like with anything else, if you put this knowledge in the hands of the wrong people, if you give a nuclear weapon to a Cro-Magnon man, they might not know what to do with it, or they might bash it with a rock and blow everything up.
Well, yes, sir.
Yeah.
True.
And you give something to us modern folks, and you know, AI can do cool things like help do medical screenings before the doctor gets there, can analyze stuff that we can't grasp and give us new ways to look at something. Or it can be used to spam people and to scam people and turn in plagiarized papers, things like that. We can make anything.
The book that I'm reading talks a lot about IQ and SQ, you're talking about spiritual.
Okay.
And you know that science has, it's like Roger always says, it's faith. And yeah, we have to believe certain axioms.
Mhm.
And but anyway, they say that, you know, faith at its best would have a combination of both IQ and SQ.
Definitely. It's your whole self. I read some stuff a while ago about the kind of missionary history of the church in other parts of the world, like North America, and then eventually South America, Africa, Southeast Asia. And for a long time, it was this very top-down kind of we're your benefactors. This sort of implied we're better than you attitude, right? You poor benighted peoples, you simpletons, we'll help you, right? And then eventually it shifted to more of an accompaniment that we are learning from one another. We're all walking in faith together. How do we help you? How do you help us? Maybe we've got some resources, but maybe you have a spiritual IQ that's better than ours. And the shift that happened was, instead of it being the missionary societies or the big churches in Europe or North America just pouring money in, workers in, it was, you know, and that it had to be either church or like hospitals and schools and things like that. It became like, no, you have to minister and share the gospel to the whole person, body and soul, the social needs, the medical, the education, but then also the gospel and the spirituality. You need to address the whole person. And I think that's part of what he was getting to earlier in the book, is if you say only religion and no science, or only science and no religion, you're either ignoring a part of yourself, like saying, well, you don't just believe in the Pythagorean theorem, like there's steps and axioms and stuff that led you to that. There's things you assume and just trust. Same thing with faith. You don't just go like, oh, God is Trinity. No, like, where would that even come from? There's centuries of prayer and spirituality and conversation that led to that. We inherit that. So it all builds and stuff. But to say that it could only be one or the other, you're basically cutting off a limb of your person. You're not engaging with the world or with God with your person. So that's why this chapter is about unknowing, or as we're going to get to today, purgation. It's deconstructing what you think you know, and then building it back up. And he tells the story about teaching introductory physics in college, and everybody comes in thinking they know stuff, and maybe they don't actually know. He had the example with the baseball. What keeps the baseball going after the bat's no longer touching? It's not the air, it's not gravity, it's this whole, what Newton's laws of physics, right? There's these other things going on that they didn't know. And he said, in that case, there's not a lot at stake. It's not too hard to be like, oh, it's not gravity? Oh, okay, tell me what it is. And you take away that assumption and build it back up. But he says when it comes to matters of faith in God, it's trickier because that's so personal. Because if you mess with one part of God, of your ideas of God, your theology, then that can make everything else feel shaky. And so I couldn't even remember where we left off. So I went back to the video. And I finished with that story of the guy in our class at our first year of seminary getting up and challenging the professor for kind of pushing against. He didn't want some certain pieces to be disassembled and put back together. He didn't want to that was frightening. And that triggered some anger and some defensiveness. I get that way too. I think we all do. So everybody's got that pressure point that you don't want to push them. So that's where we're picking up today on page 86. He's talking about purgation. It's from the same root as purgatory or purge. It's where you purify, it's where you get rid of the bad stuff and build it back up. So this is at the top of 86. A thorough scraping out of all illusions, a real cleansing of the temple, so to speak. And again, he said, everything you know or you think you know about your own identity, as worthy or not so worthy, as smart or not so smart, as daughter or son, as mother or father, as successful or unsuccessful, as Christian or Jewish, etc., is also lost. Everything you think you know about God and yourself, it's stripped away. And then all labels are torn away. With them go all or nearly all beliefs, including and perhaps especially the really good ones. This unknowing, called purgation, is an inner journey from well-mapped and familiar terrain to a trackless wilderness. Think of Job, right? He thought he had it all figured out. He didn't even think he had it all figured out. He just knew. He didn't. It wasn't something he sat and thought about every day. He just knew. That gets all stripped away. It's painful. At the middle of 86, he has this quote. This is from John of the Cross, who was a mystic, and right around the same time as the Reformation. I don't have the dates. When this purgation is most severe, the soul feels very keenly the shadow of death, and the lamentations of death, the pains of hell, which consist in feeling itself to be without God and chastised and cast out and unworthy. That doesn't sound good. Why would anybody want that? Next chapter. Yet the consensus of those who have undergone this radical unknowing is that it happens not when God is absent, but when God is so close as to be indiscernible. This is counterintuitive. The living God should not make you feel overshadowed by death. The divine presence should not make you certain of its absence. A God of abundance should not cause you to sense acute loss. Something so good should not make you feel so bad. Many metaphors seek to describe this paradox, but perhaps the best and simplest is provided by the sun. One who looks directly at the sun will see light, but will be blinded and lost in darkness. And this is due not to an absence of light, but to its overabundance. Oversaturation by light is effectively darkness, but brilliant darkness. He did not come up with that phrase. It comes from an anonymous 6th century Syrian monk. Brilliant darkness. This solar metaphor, due ultimately to Plato, shows up repeatedly in the literature of Christian mystics. The more directly we look at the sun, the greater is the darkness which it causes in our visual faculty, overcoming and overwhelming it through its own weakness. It's John of the Cross. Reading through the literature of purgative experiences can be haunting. There are cases of authors who, if they were alive today, would certainly be diagnosed with severe clinical depression. But most of them are not of this variety, and John of the Cross himself drew a clear distinction between spiritual purgation and depression. Moreover, suffering of itself has no value, and true experiences of God are never thoroughly negative. There always comes a lifting of the burden, a dawning of the day of resurrection. You might have the death first, but then resurrection comes. You might have the purgation to strip away what you think you know, but then this new revelation, new insight comes. All things are made. So before we get back to Job, are there any stories of that you have of deconstruction, of unlearning, unknowing something? And this could be in a class you took, like he described, but it could just also be in your life, work, marriage, parenting, whatever. Do you have an experience where you were really confronted with something and you have to say, I thought I knew and I don't, and I need to build back up? What humbled you, I guess?
You've heard this story before, because I was agnostic for most of my life, until I realized it had a lot of holes in it. And I had to rethink at that point.
Was there a moment, do you think? Was there
It was more of
some light bulb that
an
would make you?
intellectual thing. It was in, and I said this before, that I overuse this term, but it was sort of like a God change. That every nationality, every civilization has had some form of a God. So it's sort of like built into our DNA that we have to have that. And I thought if that was the case, then as an agnostic, all I had to look forward to was a hole in the ground. And I thought there had to be more to it than that, because if everybody has that feeling of some kind of Godhead, then you would not end up. An oxymoron, you would not end up in a hole in the ground if mankind has that inherent
Right,
feeling of a God.
right. Yeah, I've read something where it talked about that everybody has a God-shaped hole. Right, you're trying to find what it is. It's, some folks will have a time of, real stress, the loss of a job, death of somebody close to you, that kind of snaps you out of whatever routines you were in. Maybe makes you have to re-examine things.
Well, I was raised in a very fundamental church, and my mother saved me, I guess, because she really wasn't fundamental. We just went there because it's somewhere we could walk to,
I know that feeling.
Yeah, so when I got to be older, I just began, I guess I must have been just out of college, those days when you try to think you're smart. I began to see that any God that I loved wouldn't be as vindictive as the Jesus, the God is that I was taught to believe in. So I think I went through a period, I decided I was going to unknow everything I knew about God. There was a book, I think Alan Jones from the cathedral in San Francisco or something wrote this book, and a lot of it was about unknowing what you knew before. And it was, but I don't remember any big thing happening except that I changed my attitude. And I think the attitude I have now is better.
Yeah, there was no such even no flash in our hand, that type of thing.
Yeah.
It didn't happen.
Some people get it, some
Yeah.
have that, some people don't.
I worked in a hospital then, and I was then working in the delivery area, labor and delivery, and part of my class study was to take on a case study, and I took on this woman who was pregnant. She was Roman Catholic, and she was obsessed with the fact that this baby was going to be born and not baptized before the baby, something happened to the baby and the baby died.
Right.
And she decided to make me responsible for making sure that that baby was baptized. And, well, that was a long story, but anyhow, afterwards, a month or two later, she called me on my cell phone, got my phone number, called in the phone and asked me if it was holy water. So I said yes. It was holy to me.
Well, and, the official church doctrine of our denomination is that anybody can do a baptism, especially in an emergency situation. That happens a lot in hospitals. But,
My thought was, so how can an educated person even believe that the God that she spent so much time with would be so?
because that was her education.
Yeah.
Part of being, she's educated, but part of the education was this, this kind of all or nothing or else kind of a thing when it comes to baptism. And when I work with families who want to get their kid baptized, I say, I want to make sure you understand what baptism is and what it isn't. And it's not this sort of insurance policy, right? It's not this get them baptized or else. It's baptizing into something. And yes, you get eternal life and all that, but if the goal to bring somebody to baptism is to, make sure they don't go to hell and that's it, then there's gonna have to be some unknowing and building back up, because there's so much more to it.
Doesn't that stem from teaching which I learned in Missouri Synod was original sin?
Sure. But see, like kind of like Judy said, I can't imagine that an innocent baby who just didn't get baptized, or some tribe in the Amazon who's never heard of Jesus, or up in the Himalayas, or just your parents never brought you as a kid to get baptized. Like, is God really just gonna be like, sorry, open the hell trap door? Like, I just can't, that doesn't track with Old or New Testament.
He's not a God I want people.
Of Old Testament saying, God, yes, there's some vengeance and, and disturbing things in the Old Testament, but over and over again, the refrain is that our God is slow to anger and our God is steadfast and merciful, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast. How many second chances do the people of Israel get? Yeah, they have consequences, but God does not abandon them. God stays true to the covenants. In the New Testament, Jesus says, love your enemies. Jesus doesn't turn anybody away. Samaritans, lepers, you name it. He's talking to them, he's touching them, he's eating with them. Tax collectors. I can't track all of that with, oh, I'm sorry, your baby was not baptized and they were, tragedy of like a stillbirth or something. In that moment, someone's gonna say, sorry, your baby wasn't saved. I can't. Like that's just cruel and to me.
You hit a point a little bit ago about with Israel always falling into disarray. And it's always said, well, God did this to them. I think it more or less God stayed with them through the whole thing, but their situation was basically because of their own free will.
Oh, sure.
They got themselves in those situations, and then there's for every cause there's a reaction.
Yeah.
So, but
Now I'll say God told the king of Babylon to come in,
yeah,
but it's always, well, these were the rules,
so I don't think he ever gave up on them.
No,
It's just some of their circumstances was not due to God, like some people say. It was due to their own free will and mistakes.
Yeah.
And then you have to pay the consequences for it. So I think that's a learning experience
Mhm.
that you have to make you a better individual or a better organization or whatever it may be. So I heard that where, well, God did this because they did that. I have a hard time buying that. I have more like it was a response to their own actions and God always stayed with them through. That seems more realistic to me.
Yeah.
Than God said, "I'm just, you bad boys, smack them." I don't buy that.
when people spout that stuff after a hurricane or something, I don't buy it.
No.
In the Old Testament, there are passages where it's spelled out cause and effect, you did this, so God's doing this. And then we gotta wrestle with that, we gotta put it in context.
But I think that's the nature of the time.
Sure,
I think it was just a cause and effect, like you said, simple mistake, but that's all it was.
but I think that exile is also the form of this purgation. They were worshiping idols, they were mistreating the poor and vulnerable in their cities, they weren't listening to the prophets. Okay, you're getting pulled out of everything you knew and loved. You're being sent to live in captivity in these other places like Babylon, and Esther was in Persia, I think, and Egypt, Assyria. You're gonna have to deal with all of that. We're gonna still send prophets and priests with you. We're gonna, start understanding that it wasn't about the temple, like that passage a couple weeks ago of, David says, I want to build a house for God. And God says, I don't need a house. I'm perfectly happy traveling with you. So let's go away for a while. God is still with you. And then we'll come back and see if we can build a temple from scratch.
Martin Luther explained the 10 Commandments in our catechism. The third commandment says to honor your father and mother. And I think it's the third. Anyway,
Depends on which
yeah.
different people might work.
Anyway, the meaning of it says something about, sins of the fathers upon the children to the third, fourth generation.
Yeah.
So that's probably where the original sin. Thought of the
It's part of it.
sin comes
Yeah, that's passed on. I like the way we have it in our confessions, that we do, we are captive to sin, we're in bondage to sin, we cannot free ourselves, that. When I think of original sin, yes, there's the little s sins that we all commit, but then there's also just this brokenness. That we live in a sinful world where disasters happen. I'm not saying like this one where thieves sting because you're bad, Susie, right? It just is a broken world. And someday the promises is that it will be made new.
It could be that if you live, everything is always perfect, you never grow.
Right.
So I think there has to be some mechanism in that growing point, be negative, so you can appreciate when it's not negative. If everything was always the same, you would not grow. You would stick. Nothing would ever.
Has anybody ever watched The Good Place?
Mhm.
At the show? Have you seen that show? Did you watch it all the way through to the end?
They did. My daughter did.
There's a TV show called The Good Place.
It's a good place.
Oh. That's what
Did you see it to the end?
I don't think I did.
Okay.
My daughter did. She talked about it, so I know what
It's-
that episode was.
It's a very good show. It's funny, but it's also very thought provoking. The premise is that this woman wakes up and she says, "Well, Eleanor, you died. Welcome to the good place." But she quickly realizes that they've got the wrong Eleanor. She's not supposed to be there. That she was not this great humanitarian. She's just actually a really selfish, terrible person. And it unfolds from there. For 4 seasons, it explores all sorts of philosophy and theology.
It's a company.
It's a comedy. It's very funny, but it's very thought provoking. And so I won't do a spoiler, but where they get to in the end of the show is very interesting in terms of what is afterlife? What does any of this mean? What kind of creator would create this system where you just send people to eternal punishment? And what is the point of all of this? I recommend it highly. If you can stand a little irreverence, if you can stand a little bit of, it's not R-rated by any means, but it's a little bit PG-13 sometimes. It's a very good show. Okay, back to Job. We are on page 87. At the very bottom of 87, it says, "As we've seen, God is not a pleasant character in the book of Job. It's difficult to warm to a tempest," it says. I like that line. The whirlwind howls against Job for 125 solid verses, bringing to mind Teresa of Avila, another Christian mystic. If you've never read the Mystics, it's an interesting trip. Teresa of Avila, John of the Cross, Thomas à Becket, Catherine of Siena. There's a number of them. Thurgood, something Thurgood, John Thurgood. They've existed as long as there's been Christians. They're usually the ones that are a little bit on the outside edge of things, but they have these visions, these dreams, these realistic but fantastic encounters, and then they write them down and share them with people. So Teresa of Avila's is called Las Moradas in Spanish, and it's what is it? It's basically like the labyrinth inside yourself, like this journey you take to get to the center to discover who you are and who God is, and then they come back out. So they're really interesting, sometimes weird, but it's a very important piece to Christianity that balances out all the systematics and theology and all that stuff. It's a different side of things. Anyway, Teresa of Avila said, "Lord, if this is the way you treat your friends, no wonder you have so few of them." He says, but we might read the vociferous vortex in a more sympathetic light. If we interpret Job's experience as a case of purgation via cosmos, think about it. Job is tormented by his losses and longs for death. Not even sleep offers him respite. He says, when I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so I would choose strangling and death rather than this body. He cries to God. In all appearances, God has abandoned him. If I go forward, he is not there, or backward, I cannot perceive him. His words line up well with John's description of purgation, and for Job, it is the cosmos that completes the process. Purgation is particularly distressing for those who have a major interest in holding on to what is being purged. My students don't have a lot of invested in their incorrect assumptions about motion, so they can unknow them and learn basic physics without drama, or too much drama. But he who has built his very life on a particular set of beliefs will experience disorientation and even dereliction when these beliefs are disassembled and carved away. That's what we were saying a minute ago. Even else here. And if there was ever a man who was invested in his beliefs, it is Job, who was formed by the standard issue wisdom of Proverbs. We already talked about this. He was at the top of society. God is just like me. He has all these assumptions. He believes that human beings are the center of the story, and all of that gets deconstructed, top of 89, leaving him in a brotherly relationship with the dreadful behemoth. Right? In the face of these losses, who is he? There's the question. Right? Who am I? And who is God? Face of these losses, who is he? It's no wonder that Job feels abandoned, homeless, lost. God's unpleasant personality in Job, I propose, is an expression of this pain of purgation, not an objective feature of the divine. Still, and he'll say this in a little bit, it still doesn't really explain why God would do this in the first place. Hey, have you considered Job? But all the later parts of the book where God is just in Job's face, he says it's purgation by cosmos. It's not God being a jerk. The vortex offends not because God is a bully, but because by bringing Job face to face with the cosmos, it exposes the gap between what he thought was true and what is actually true. This gap has a name, and it is ignorance. Not simple ignorance of, no, Lord, I do not know when the mountain goats give birth. It is the gap, as Job might say, between the hearing of the ear and the seeing of the eye. The reason he's quoting so many mystics is that mystical experiences help bridge the gap between revelation and wisdom. Thought was true, but is actually true. That explains what my friend did in that class that day. Nobody wants to have that much stripped away if it's one of the cornerstones of your foundation. You don't talk to somebody who went through an earthquake and say, wasn't it great that your house got knocked down? Now you can rebuild it, right? No, that's not how it works. And this can happen with a relationship with a person. If you feel like, well, you've changed, what's different, you know? That's partly that you're picking something up different in them, but it's also challenging who you are in that relationship too. If you start messing with somebody's faith, not for some folks, if you change the hymnal, if you change, we had somebody physically threaten the senior pastor we worked with in Minnesota for suggesting that maybe they move the baptismal font to a different part of the altar area.
Are you serious about that?
Yeah, I said, you know, I better not find you in a dark alley or something. Yeah, I kid you not. So for some people, it's all tied together, right? Even the furniture is part of, if you mess with one strand of that web, the whole thing's in shape.
And now science is going through that, so.
Yeah.
Where that new telescope is now put in some kind of glitch in their
Right. Their
equation, yeah, and they're fighting real hard to try and keep hold of it. I've been reading some articles about it, and.
Yeah, you don't have to go back to the drawing board.
No, but they're trying to justify the Big Bang, even though it's showing, so they're making excuses, just like, I'll try to make an analogy to that, where. I used to know, where something happened, they say, well, it didn't really happen, it just seems to happen, you know, like
Oh, I have some examples, but.
yeah, but that's what I'm talking about, so that's in modern day times, that's one thing where. This, their sacred bull got gored, and now they're trying to find a way to resurrect that bull,
Well, look at the book 1984,
yeah, oh, wow.
right? Well, what you think just happened didn't really happen.
Yeah,
It was this instead. Right, I mean. And why do you think there was the Scopes monkey trial? And why do you think there's still pushback to teachings of evolution? Well, if you think that evolution challenges the bedrock, one of the bedrock pillars of your faith and everything you built your life on, that God created humanity and we're at the top and we're special. And if you have evolution coming along and either you read it or you have it interpreted for you as saying, we're no longer the center, or we evolved from apes and God wasn't a part of it, oh yeah, of course you're gonna bristle at that. But it depends on how you're talking about it. It depends on how you frame it. There's a lot of time, like Galileo, and saying that the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, that the sun goes around the Earth. Boy, you got thrown into jail for that.
communicated.
Yeah,
Let's turn out our statutes that we didn't fight the Civil War.
well, yeah, that's another one. I mean, what does that mean? It depends on who you talk to, right? If you talk to one side, or not one side, there's more than two sides, but if you talk to some people, they'll say this is a monument to a part of the history, right? And this was a part of the heritage of the city, this Monument Avenue, right?
So, own it.
Yeah, and so we'll tell the stories around it, and for other folks, they say this is a daily reminder of a part of our history where I was considered to be less than a person. I don't want to look at that.
I think I would tear down all the trash because it reminds me of have trouble with pencil arrows.
Sure, sure, not quite the same gravity. It's not quite the same gravity. So, I mean, and you know, the guy with the submarine, right, he did other stuff that contributed to science. But for his part in the Civil War, that was said to be, you know, that's too much. So I don't know.
The thing with the Monument Avenue, that just struck a chord in me. The people, and I'm sure if I were black, I'd have that same kind of feeling, and I don't want to look at that anymore. It wasn't a good period of my life, and I want it gone. But the trouble with it is once it's gone, you take it away, then everybody forgets about it. Because
Well, that's the
it's like taking it away from history, you know.
Well, that's just it. Just because you take a statue down doesn't mean the whole story disappears. It's incumbent upon the people of the city, the teachers, the school, folks who develop school curriculum. It's incumbent to teach the whole story from as many different perspectives as you can, so then people can be like, oh, I have the whole picture now.
And my theory on that was that if you don't remember the history, you're gonna repeat it.
Right.
And not only that, but it is part of what Virginia is made of. And so own it. The difference is, my grandmother come from Germany.
Mhm.
I could sit here and feel very bad about what Germans did during World War II
Sure.
or World War I or what, or
Mhm.
the Prussian Wars, whatever. But it wasn't my time. It
No.
was their time. So I don't have to take responsibility for that. Likewise, they shouldn't have to take
Sure. But do you know what?
responsibility for that either.
Do you know what they did in Germany though? There is not a single statue of Hitler.
I know that.
There is not a
Okay.
single monument to the Nazi government.
Mein Kampf is illegal.
In fact, well, and that maybe is going too far
Mhm.
to make it illegal, but maybe, but I understand why they did that. But everywhere you look, there are monuments and plaques to Holocaust survivors and to what happened, so that they will never forget. So they took the things down, but they put something else in its place, and they make sure to tell the story. So if we're gonna take some stuff down here, let's put something else up in its place that tells the story. Right, I think so, I would.
As long as they tell the story and not make it one-sided.
Right, and I think that was the initial objection, is
We're about
that,
turning statutes down, make it for itself.
right, so whatever goes in its place, it better be,
I always wonder how many people who were killed in the Civil War actually owned slaves.
not everybody, but,
Not everybody, so they were fighting for some reason other than slavery.
well, most soldiers don't necessarily fight for the reasons that the history books say.
Also, because of Wales and town did it.
Or because you need the money.
I don't, Marilyn and Gordon, I taught with
with, Lynn Helmsel, which you all know, very southern. And she said she was taught in school, and probably she was, that it was about states' rights.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what that governor, anyway, somebody got really a bunch of bad press this week for saying that, but that was what was actually taught.
Oh, yeah.
And in a way,
But it was also
states' rights, it
Yeah.
was,
Sure.
because we asked her, well, what state right was it they were fighting about? Well, then, so it was states' rights, but it was the states' rights.
To,
One of the things
Govern
was to have
themselves.
slavery, now there might have been more than one thing.
course.
It's like in Iowa during the Civil War,
Yeah.
when my uncles were in, went to the war. What the governor did was, I think it was the governor, I might be wrong, it may have been a local official. But what he did is he published everybody's name that was under 25 years of age. That was not in this, was not in the military.
jeez.
So.
Guilt tripped everybody?
So, yeah, it's a guilt trip, and so they had to join, otherwise the next, there, because it's a Victorian type attitude or that. So if you didn't join, you were considered something less than
Patriotic.
patriotic. So he published all their names in the paper under 26 or 25 years of age.
Yeah.
So they pretty much forced it. Or the other one was where your neighbor went, you had to go. So a lot of it was
Peer pressure.
peer pressure.
social
that they
pressure,
went.
propaganda.
Yeah.
What was I gonna say? There, for generations, the history books were saying stuff like, but the slaves had it better here than they had it in Africa. Or, stuff like that too. So there's a lot of distortion. If you go back and actually look at some of the textbooks that people are being taught. So there again, I mean. If the monuments stayed up, then you gotta change the way you teach it.
No, they just go ahead and put the other side, the plaque on the monument to have both sides of the story. So
What they should have done is left them and put up other monuments to counteract them. And
Yeah.
then you'd have both sides.
Well,
One
apparently
side,
they went for the purgation route. I'm
yeah.
bringing it back.
Dump it all.
We're gonna take it down and start over. I got back there. I made it. We made it back. Alright, but that you can, so even this, these are good examples, whether it's evolution or, Civil War history. Whether you agree with it or not, this process of saying, well, let's tear it down and let's build it back up. Pushes on things that we maybe never thought about before, or that were essential to us growing up, or how we learned history, or how we understood God, whatever the situation is, fill in the blank. If you start pushing against something that you don't want to have to deconstruct and reconstruct, then we're going to have feelings about that. We're going to have resistance to that. That's human nature. Nobody wants to be deconstructed and reconstructed. There's a reason why Dr. McCoy on Star Trek didn't like the transporters. I don't want my molecules flying through space and being put back together again, right? He just objected to it on a philosophical level. He was a medical doctor, right? This is all fiction. But he knew how the science of it worked. But on a fundamental level, he didn't like it taken apart and put back together. Nobody likes it. Joe didn't like that. So we're on page
It could be
89.
something as Galaxy Quest, where they did that.
Yeah.
You see that movie?
Yeah. Yeah.
They came back inside out.
Yeah. All right, page 89, how we doing time? We're okay, okay. Bottom of 89. Perhaps Job did not see God at all. What Job saw was the earth, the sky, storm clouds, the wilderness, an assortment of strange creatures, chaos thrashing madly beneath it all. There was no exhibit on the tour called God. The vortex talked a lot about God, but God was never the object of Job's perception. He saw the cosmos, but he claims to have seen God. And at the end of the book, he says, I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes see. Excuse me. So in other words, here we go. Perhaps the answer lies in this admittedly strange sounding formula. To see with the eye is to see as God sees. In other words, Job did not see God. He was taken up into God's seeing. He saw God by seeing the cosmos as God sees. Taken up into God's seeing, that is strange language. That is the kind of thing that mystics say. I was taken up into the heavens, right? That's part of the language in the New Testament too. Paul has a vision where he was taken up into the third heaven or something like that. It's a strange language, but it really is a simple and concrete matter. And so he gets into this short story about a man and his son walking in the forest, and the boy sees a sparrow. And he's like, "What's that?" He never seen one before. And the dad's like, "It's a sparrow." So the dad's like, "Whatever. These are the most common bird. They're just brown, plain, whatever. Nothing fancy here." But the kid never seen one. The kid is completely in awe. Surprising feature of the living cosmos. And they both heard with the ear, but the boy now has seen with his eye. If this man, the parent, were unable, or if he were able to unknow what he knows about sparrows, this common bird, he might see the bird as his son does. Maybe you've had that experience. Maybe you take your kid to see fireworks for the first time. And you're not watching the fireworks, you're watching your kid's reaction to the fireworks. You go to the zoo, you're gonna look at the animal, but you're also watching the kids and watching them experience it the first time. Bring some of that back to you. It's that living vicarious feeling. And so down on page 90, down towards the bottom, this unknowing is precisely what happens to Job. It's the gift of purgation. Once all concepts and assumptions are deconstructed and hauled away, Job's vision is clear. The log has been removed from his eye, as Jesus might say. He's able to see the cosmos as God sees it, caring for the desert, grass, the ostriches, Leviathan. Before the vortex arrived, he was aware of the wilderness creatures, but he could not see them. In chapter 30, Job says, "I am a brother to jackals and a companion of ostriches." That was before he gets to see as God sees. He believes his relation to these denizens of desolation exists only by virtue of his miserable circumstances. These animals, in other words, are ugly and embarrassing, just as he is ugly and embarrassing. His vision is blocked. He does not see them. He sees only himself. But the vortex draws near. The cosmos is illumined. The jackals and ostriches look brand new. He sees that there is nothing shameful about them. He sees that they are beautiful. He sees the mountain goat and the raven and the vulture just as God does, simply and directly, as the free and proud creatures that they are, each one unique and valuable in themselves. They were no longer gamey and embarrassing and bloody dots on the outer fringes of his consciousness, but peculiar and divinely made creatures, living within their own communities, communities from which human civilization itself appeared distant. So we can apply this to creation and the cosmos like Job is doing. He can see these other communities of animals like God does now. Well, now apply that to people. There's these other communities, all the thems to our us's, all the folks that don't think like us, that it's very easy to be like, "Oh, those people." All of us do it. Maybe not consciously sometimes, but all of us do it. I do it still. Like I was an awkward teenager, right? I was a homebody. I didn't have a ton of friends. I had to go to the parties. I'm not asking for your pity. Just not what it is. I wasn't sad. I was a happy kid, but I wasn't part of all of that. And when the cool groups would be around, or like a group of jocks or something would be around, I was not one. I have nothing against jocks, but I would feel kind of uncomfortable because I knew that I wasn't in that group. Still to this day, and I just turned 44. If there's like a group of 3 or 4 teenagers walking through the grocery store and they're clearly like in their group, they're doing their thing, there's some part in the back of my brain that still has that reaction of, oh, I'm not part of that group. And everybody's got something like that. If you're the one person who is of the different ethnicity living in the neighborhood, if you're the one person who marries into the family who's from someplace else, and it could be ethnicity, it could be religion, it could be that you're you're in a New York Jets family and you're a Dolphins fan, like whatever it is, there can be that disconnect. So have you ever experienced anything on the one side, unknowing back to wonder, seeing a sparrow for the first time again? Or have you ever been taken up into God seeing some other group or person in a different way than you had before?
I used to enjoy fishing off the pier in Yorktown, and the parents would bring the kids out, and whenever I took a fish, I'd give the rod to the kid.
Okay,
to bring in,
okay.
and they were, the first time in their life they never caught a fish.
Did it ever get old?
Oh, no, it never got old.
Yeah.
And at times I had kids standing in the line waiting for the next fish to get caught.
That's,
But, then they'd break out the cameras and take all kinds of pictures of the kid. The fish would be this big. but
yeah,
Their first.
So they got the reward, not the anxiety sitting there for an hour.
there you go. That's a very diverse thing, Lord. You cut out a lot of the downside of fishing. Did you make them clean it? Did you make them clean it?
No, we were catch and release.
Oh, okay. That was the same fish, you just kept catching them.
They never were very
That's
smart.
part of the act.
Yeah. But the kids really have
Yeah,
a smile and a good time.
isn't that amazing? To see that, yeah. Any others? The kid wonder awe thing for yourself or others, or the kind of more Job-like smack with the 2x4 of, whoa, I didn't see it that way.
Oh, one
I
thing,
was raised Catholic,
Oh, yeah,
and I was taught that only Catholics would go to heaven.
sure,
I mean, so I was feeling sorry for all the neighbors.
yeah.
And then, I switched to public school and thinking, all these not good kids, but none of them going to heaven.
Did you ever get around that?
Well, I finally got lassoed in by a Lutheran girl.
There you go. Yeah.
Maybe the Catholic weren't 100% right.
Yeah, maybe we don't know. We'll let God sort it out.
Big race in the Midwest. I remember the first time I saw Lake Michigan, you
Oh.
couldn't see it all the way across.
Yeah,
You know, that, I mean, that was just a lake,
right.
but, and then, you know, a short time afterwards, to see the oceans and the mountainside, and, you know. We raised a flatland.
what I would do, talk about, I did this sort of as a vindictively, but when I was in college, like I said, I was not religious. And I used to have a lot of fun with a lot of these groups like the Mormons and what's one thing of this, Watchtower. Jehovah's Witness would come around, and like I said, I had a room in a home, so they thought I was part of that house, but wasn't. And I'd always come up with some kind of scenario that it was fun for me to watch them squirm, I guess, is the basic way to put it. I would come up with a scenario that their faith could not really answer.
Were you trying to
I was like,
whirlwind them?
huh?
Were you trying to whirlwind them?
I was just having fun being vindictive and
Okay. Did that change?
now,
Yeah.
at this point, I changed out, but when I was in, I didn't, and I'd love to watch them squirm, because I was trying to put air, I was probably playing the devil's advocate, basically.
Yeah.
Trying to put a little air in their situation, but they couldn't control it.
So what happens now if somebody knocks on the door?
He doesn't have the door.
It's like
I just like to tell them I'm not interested.
Sure.
That's what I tell them now, but then I would come up with a basic scenario I'd bring up. I says,
Yeah.
if you got two people standing here and they're walking down the road and this tree falls down, misses one of them and kills the other, why does that happen?
Mhm.
And they can't answer.
Well, that is a perfect segue, Roger. So he gets back to, okay, that explains the whirlwind part, right? That when we get to the whirlwind, God's not being a bully, God's just helping Job purge, right? It's the purgation. And Job kind of has the reset button, sees his place from God's perspective and says, I repent. But then he gets, in this next section, he gets back to the beginning. He says, God feels just mean and capricious to even do this in the first place. Why let the accuser do these things to Job? What kind of God would do that? What kind of God would let the tree hit Job and not somebody else, basically? Or Job's family. Top of 92. Moreover, it seems that even a God with interests all over the cosmos, who loves all things and balances all needs, etc., still could have done a little more to protect poor Job. God seems to attend more carefully to goats and oxen than to him. Job may not be the most important living thing in the cosmos, but neither is the desert grass. And the losses are not Job's alone. His wife lost 10 children. Certainly these children had friends, perhaps their own families. We just can't understand a God who watches over a newborn deer, but allows such misery to fall upon Job and his family. The truth is, once the cosmos sweeps out his old God concept, Job can never understand God again. My physics students' faulty beliefs, once deconstructed, are quickly succeeded by Newton's laws. these laws are tidy replacements. They merely fill the conceptual space where the old ideas used to be. But once Job's old ideas about God are purged via cosmos, there is no simple replacement for them. There is no clean conceptual model to fill the space where the old God as invisible patriarch idea used to be. That space remains forever empty and free. And judging by Job's response to the cosmic tour, that's how it should be. After losing his idea of God, he walks away from the ash heap with a light step, humbled and relieved and newly open to the world. His old God concept was heavier baggage than he ever realized. That's not satisfying, right? Okay, so we deconstructed, but what fills in its place? Maybe that's where the New Testament comes up, but as far as Job goes, where does that leave us? And then finally, we're gonna sneak this in. Ending the debate, bottom of 92. Back to the mystics. The mystics, mystics each have their own fanciful visions, each do their own thing. They're wonderful to read, but they're confusing as heck. But one of the themes amongst all of them is that they say God is incomprehensible, right? They have this strange encounter. They come away feeling changed and lighter. They saw something that rocked them and built their faith up new, but they have no idea, right? God is incomprehensible. Page 93 at the bottom. The difference between God and the cosmos is this: God resists conceptualization, cosmos does not. We can study it, we can put laws on it to describe what happens. The tendency of certain people not to respect this distinction, I believe, is one source of the media spectacle that is the science versus religion culture war. Science can be conceptualized, God cannot. On the one hand, you have the Ken Hams and Albert Mohlers, he was the guy who was on the other end of the extreme, who think God is capable of being displaced by scientific theories like evolution. On the other hand, you have scientifically motivated atheists like Richard Dawkins who think the same thing, either or. One of the lessons of Job is that this assumption is wrong. God is not containable by any concepts, even good ones that last a long time, work fine until they don't. God is beyond ideas and essentially so. Once we let this simple claim settle in, everything changes for Job and for us. He loses his God concept, but gains God. So he loses his ideas, but gets the real thing. Subsequently, stepping more lightly as he leaves ash heap behind. We give up the contemporary assumption of the opposition of science and religion, and we can walk away from that debate like Job walked away from his, knowing that it's ultimately no more than an expression of our own desire to control, that is to say, deny God. And it's hopeful to consider that God is not a manipulable thing, like a chess man, or a hammer, or a wedge. That idea is our own dreadful creation, like making a bomb out of the beauty of physics. As it is for Job, so it is for us. Only after facing the poverty of even our best ideas about God will we be able to take them lightly. And only then will we be able to see God and the cosmos as they really are. So the goal and the benefit of purgation is that you let go of the stuff that you're carrying, even good things, and then you actually maybe are more open to what God is up to, even the surprising stuff that wouldn't fit into how you thought it was supposed to be.
I wonder if somewhere in that spot between the purgation and the accepting something new, a new way of life, if that isn't where we lose young people, is what I really am thinking, but not for everyone.
Yeah.
That they get to that point and it's so confusing perhaps, or it seems that they feel so good now that they've purged themselves of all.
Sure.
Well, I think it's more like just men in war and they come home and the other guy doesn't. And they have PTSD from guilt to why did I survive and the other guy didn't?
Yeah.
Because the way I was
Well,
raised
that's the point,
with God was that we're all God's children,
Right.
So why was he picked and I wasn't?
Right.
So a lot of PTSD is from that.
Sure. So if the purgation for that particular scenario is that God wasn't picking and choosing, but that we live in a broken world and God is with us whether we live or die,
Right.
and walks with the families and the grief, and eventually we get to the new heaven and new earth. So if you have some core stories that kind of pan out and leave a little more to God, so like Lutherans have some denominations like Presbyterians, kind of the Calvin side, have this double predestination. God has a list basically, almost like a Santa Claus, naughty and nice. Some are saved, predestined, to be saved, some are predestined to be damned.
They don't talk.
And it's already done, right? That gets downplayed because that doesn't sell. Lutherans have single predestination. And our one statement is that God desires for all to be saved, and then we stop talking. We don't know how it's gonna work out. That is God's prerogative and purview, how the sorting will happen at the end. So as far as we're concerned in this life, we just say God desires all to be saved. John 3:17. Jesus was sent into the world not to condemn the world, but in order that the whole world might be saved through him. Right? That's the desire. We don't know how it works out.
Yeah, humans don't like to think in the abstract. We
Right.
like to think in the concrete.
And that's
So-
what Judy's saying, that's where we might lose some people, because
Yeah.
we want concrete, that's
Yeah.
why the sacraments are tangible, water, bread, wine. Cause just to say, oh, well, God loves us, we need tangible stuff. That's why we baptize into a community, that's why we're not going up and down the street with a fire hose, just like, I got you, you're baptized now, right? Cause you're being baptized into a community, into the body of Christ, into the story of the gospel. And so the question I wanna leave you with, cause relate is, so what value is there in the realization that God is incomprehensible? That's what I think Judy was getting to. What does that help anybody to say that we can't fully ever know God? And then my follow-up question is,
It's liberating.
how does the incarnation fit into this, right? We just had Christmas. So I feel like that's the next part of the stories. If God is incomprehensible, but then we have Jesus in the flesh, the Word made flesh. We're gonna leave it there, we gotta run. Next week, we're gonna do the next chapter, which is called Learning to Love Leviathan. That's chapter 7, and we've got 7, 8,
Some of that Leviathan is in us.
10. We got 10, there's 10 chapters total. In theory, we should be able to get through this before we get to Lent. So that's the goal. Next week, chapter 7, Learning to Love Leviathan. Thanks for watching at home. Thanks to all of you. I'll try to talk less next time.
So you don't want this?
We really have quite, the shelf is full.